All right. Good morning, folks. This is the third video of this freestyle lecture series. I've been enjoying this, so I hope you have. If you've made it this far, you're a real fan, so thank you. In this lecture, I want to discuss the grand finale, the way that Epistolution reframes our understanding of morality. And this is the most important part of the theory. It's taken me an hour and 45 minutes to get to this moment to discuss this part, because I wanted to make sure that you understood the other components of the theory, and this didn't come out of nowhere, because when people online start talking about how we should be optimistic and there's salvation in the world, it seems like hocus pocus, right? Because everything else in the world points you in another direction. The news is always bad, and there's always problems you can think about that seem like they have no solutions, and the whole thing is very dispiriting. Our whole zeitgeist of our generation is super depressed. The music we listen to is like thumping, repetitive, depressed music. And it's really hard out there. I mean, we had a pandemic, and we have climate change, and people are worried about racism, and there's just a lot of issues, especially the ones I discussed in the part in the last lecture about acceleration, that are really hard to cope with. And this lecture is about how we can cope. It's a rational theory, a rational interpretation of biological science that gives us a reason to believe that the future will be much, much better than the past, and that we're not headed for some sort of apocalypse. So this video is about how Epistolution should make you feel in your heart, and how it should affect you, your outlook towards life. And all I can say is that it's had this effect on me. And whether I reach you or not, I can't say, but I know that I have to try, because it means a lot to me. So here goes. First, I want to do a little recap of what Epistolution is at this point. We've talked a lot. I just want to be sure we go back and cover the basic premise here. So Epistolution is a theory of knowledge, a theory about how organisms create knowledge by accumulating reality from their external environment into themselves. And it's not a matter of emerging. The patterns that sustain life don't emerge from the details of the genetic code or of anything else. They are accumulated from the outside. So the instructions for how to live come from outside. And this happens somehow through a blind search that happens during active life within bodies, within living bodies. They're blindly searching for solutions, and that is the accumulation of knowledge. And by knowledge, we mean embodied theories that better predict reality. So it's a sort of scientific knowledge, and of course science is the most rarefied form of it that we all believe in, whether we admit to it or not. Even diehard Christian evangelists and Muslims and everybody else believes in science because they get on airplanes. So you can see that they believe deeply that the theories that science provides that underpin our technologies are valid. So at least they're more valid than the alternatives. So what this means is that epistolution, this blind search, this accumulation of knowledge, that's the primary motive force of evolution. So it was presumed earlier that it was just natural selection and that it was random changes in the DNA, random mutation. So if it's just if life is just a matter of accumulated random mutation, then life is entirely accidental and it could be extinguished accidentally and we could be headed for an apocalypse. I mean, it's quite reasonable to suppose that we'll go extinct because 99% of the species on Earth have gone extinct, that have been here have gone extinct. So why should we be unlike any of those other species? And that fact weighs very heavily on our society, even though we don't always acknowledge it, because these are our fundamental assumptions about the world, that it's arbitrary, that it's based on random accident, that there's no meaning or purpose deep down in our scientific view of life. I believed that for almost my entire life. I struggled against it, struggled with it, but until I had some sort of plausible, rational alternative, I had to believe it. Just like you probably have to believe it. Epistolution is a rational alternative. There has to be a second blind search that's more primary than natural selection. Natural selection still happens. I'm not disputing that at all. It's obviously something that shapes genetic change over time, but there's something else that shapes the actual configuration of your body and every living body. And that something else, that mysterious process that I'm calling epistolution, is the primary thing that drives evolutionary change over time. And the reason we know that is because it happens so quickly and it's heritable. So the changes that happen to the genome through natural selection, they happen very, very slowly, but epistolution happens quickly. And so in order for evolution to be driving the bus, it would have to happen more quickly than epistolution because it would have to control those as errors. But it can't do that. So that means that those changes are biased towards function. And that means that our physical bodies are staying organized by learning and by accumulating knowledge. That's a big deal. That means that the things we struggle for, the things we try to understand, those things become part of the fabric of evolved life. And they become part of our bodies. And then at least a tiny percentage of that is heritable. And so it becomes part of a cumulative progress that can happen. What do I mean by progress? So biology until now has not had a teleology. In other words, it's not been supposed, because we got rid of the deistic explanations for science in the 19th century, and no scientists are going to reference any sort of supreme being or creator, and neither am I in these lectures. But we've got to somehow account for the fact that learning is heritable. So that means it's a form of progress. And so what does that mean? What's an atheistic version of progress? What are organisms sort of aiming towards? It doesn't mean that they have foresight, okay? They don't know what they're aiming towards, but it means that they can't help but accumulate knowledge about reality in order to stay alive, right? Because that's what controls their cellular functions. It's what instructs them. It's their instructions. So there's no escape from those instructions. That's what keeps us alive. It's making us walk and talk and our hearts beat. And everything that we do is attributable to that process. So that means that organisms have an awareness of their context, and whether it's conscious or not, we don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything about consciousness. I know that it's here sometimes, and it's some other times it's gone. It's gone for me for 9 hours every night, and I get little glimpses of what happened during that time. I know I was alive, so I know life can exist without consciousness. But consciousness is where I am. So that's a much deeper mystery. That's sort of the next level. After we explore epistolution, one day we'll be able to explore consciousness. Who knows when? But epistolution is here now. We can see it from the facts that are at our disposal today. And these facts force us to believe that there is a form of progress. Now, what form of progress could it be? So what is the contextual awareness that an organism possesses? If it's not emergent, it's not the kind of intelligence that a machine can possess. What does that mean? So I believe it has something to do with oscillators, us being composed of oscillators, chemical oscillators, because we're producing anticipations of our environmental conditions, right? And those are sort of circular, right? You anticipate that something will happen given something else that's just happened, and so we're sort of in rhythm, in sync with our environment, even on the cellular level. And of course, individual cells operate as miniature selves, but they cooperate in multicellular wholes. And something causes that cooperation. Well, there's a communication there across the membrane from one cell to another in a living multicellular body. And there's a communication across the boundary of the multicellular self also into the world, right? So you communicate through your sensory, your sensors and effectors, your muscles, your movements, and then your perceptions with the world outside yourself continually. And that's what tells your body how to behave. It's obvious if you think about it, right? I mean, if you want to explain why a cardiac cell is interacting with the cells around it in the way that it is, you have to zoom out and look at the whole muscle, right? And you see that the muscle's contracting, and that's forcing the cells to all behave a certain way at the same time. And then you have to can't explain why the muscle's doing what it's doing until you look at the whole heart. And you say, oh, well, it's doing that because it's holding these pieces of tissue together in a certain way. Why is the whole heart behaving the way it is? Well, you have to look at the whole organism. You're still not going to understand until you look outside and you say, oh, it's a gazelle running away from a cheetah. That's why that cardiac cell is so excited, because the heart's beating really fast, because it's all controlled in a sense by the cheetah, right? The behavior of the cardiac cell is a consequence of the instruction that's given by the cheetah to the gazelle, to the gazelle's heart, to the heart muscle, to the cardiac cell. So it comes from outside and it goes inside. So that being the motive force of evolution means that we're searching for meaning, and things are meaningful to us. And that means that we are pursuing purposes. Being is for knowing. Being is for learning about the world, and some of that knowledge is inherited through our physical system, and of course it's inherited through our cultural system. So it's inherited really, really fast through our cultural system at the speed of light, and that's what's causing acceleration. So before I talk about why that is totally awesome and should cause optimism, let me just mention a couple of things that I didn't mention in the first video about epistolution. One is that my theory of oscillators is integrated with a theory of sleep. So it's the idea there is that use and disuse happens during the day, during waking life, and sleep is the time when the whole system is turned towards repairing damage. And that's what distinguishes between use and disuse in terms of strengthening oscillations that have been used and degrading oscillations that have not been used. And that's the way the organism changes. So that's why all complex multicellular life requires some kind of sleep. It's otherwise very hard to explain, because we give up so many evolutionary advantages to go to sleep, and we lie down on the ground and we're prone and unconscious and totally vulnerable. We're not competing for mates. We have plenty of energy. It's not to save energy. We're carrying enough energy in our bodies in the form of fat cells to stay alive for months and months. So, and we use almost as much energy while we're sleeping as we do while we're awake. So it's clearly not an adaptation to just save energy. It's doing something else. It's doing some sort of organizational process. And we can see that in the way that dreams affect us and the way we don't understand things until we sleep on them, and the way our cognition degrades when we don't get sleep really rapidly, right? And you can't think. And then pretty soon you die. If you don't sleep for several days, you become deeply mentally psychotic, and then eventually you die. It also makes sense of another mystery in science, in nature, in biology, which is beauty. So why are organisms beautiful? Why do we perceive beauty in things like butterflies and sunsets and pine forests, flowers? Why do we perceive beauty? It makes sense that, like, the opposite sex of our own species would be beautiful, that we'd be deeply attracted to that sort of beauty, but that's not all we're attracted to, right? We see beauty in all sorts of things. We see beauty in mathematical equations, symphonies. So there's beauty in like underground caverns. There's beauty in glaciers. I mean, the beauty that we're able to perceive is so wide ranging, and that's a mystery. And it's also a mystery why organisms would have to be so beautiful. And here's what I mean. I understand there's a genetic explanation for why there are displays on organisms' bodies that are arbitrary, like bright colors or big wings or big tails or on peacocks and that sort of thing. And the genetic arguments about demonstrating that the organism doesn't have parasites, and demonstrating a certain self-reinforcing loop wherein females that pick mates with certain ornaments also then give birth to males with a better endowment in those ornaments, which in turn attracts the females. So there are genetic explanations like that make sense, but they make sense of why there are ornaments and why the ornaments can be arbitrary, but they don't tell us why they're beautiful. Okay, an ornament could be incredibly ugly and arbitrary, but it's not, right? And you find that organisms that live under the deep sea, where they can't see one another, are incredibly ugly, and organisms that live in the air and the light, where they can interact with other organisms through sight, they become very beautiful quite often through natural selection. Symmetrical, gorgeous. Animals and plants and birds are all very beautiful objects. And so that's a mystery, right? That's not explained. An arbitrary ornament you can explain through genes, but why should it be beautiful? especially to species that's not even related. So that's explained by epistolution, because if we are a system that's searching for meaning, that's searching for knowledge, knowledge is a sort of patterns in the world, right? They can be patterns in time or in space or both, any sort of pattern. If you're something that is in search of patterns, okay, the patterns that you already understand, that you already have fully comprehended, are boring. Like a checkerboard, you comprehend that immediately. You see the pattern, and it could extend forever. Looking at checkerboards all day, you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to be stimulated. You're going to be extremely driven to look at something else if all you can see is checkerboards. Okay, you're going to want to look at something complex and interesting, like the background of this Zoom screen, where some elements repeat and other elements don't repeat, and they're intricate and interesting because there are patterns there that you haven't fully comprehended. If you can see no patterns at all, it's just like white noise, then your brain is turned off as well, and sometimes that causes fear, right? But it's the in-between, it's the semi-ordered that we're attracted to, because those are patterns that we have not fully comprehended, and we are something that seeks comprehension, that seeks knowledge. So we're in the business of being fascinated by things that are beautiful because they're semi-ordered. The beauty has a sort of mathematical definition but it's interior to yourself and internal. That's why people have very different preferences in terms of beauty and different tastes, because some people have absorbed a lot of a particular kind of knowledge, and so their aesthetic sense is sort of tuned in a certain key, and others are tuned in a different way because they've learned different things during their lifetime. So that explains why beauty is both enthralling and also particular to each individual. So I wanted to include that before I moved on to optimism, because that's such a powerful thing about life, is just experiencing beauty, and not to have a scientific explanation for that, and also not to have been seeking very hard to have one, is a marvel, because it's a really interesting, deep question. And the concept of emergence, I think, was interfering with our ability to pursue that question, as well as the difficulty of doing experiments on the question. So optimism. So what is this awareness that we have, this outward looking awareness of our environment? Is so different from what a computer can do, right? In the particular sense, it's the understanding that a particular thing is going to go to a particular place at a particular time. It's the awareness of how things move around us, and what those things are composed of, whether they're hard or soft or cushy, dangerous, prickly, warm, loving, whether they're good for us or bad for us, right? So in the particulars, it's like a robot could do it, right? A robot could predict the movement of particular things, but being able to integrate that knowledge and understand how the whole picture works together is something that shapes the way you approach life, at a deep, deep level, right? And the knowledge of the consequences, the deeper, longer term consequences of things that are happening, so deep that you can't even pick out individual scenarios from them. That's morality. Our sense of morality is our sense that if certain things happen, they prevent opportunities in the long run, or they encourage opportunities in the long run. So the conventional view of morality is something like a set of rules, like the 10 Commandments, like thou shalt not do this and thou shalt do this, and that sort of thing. but philosophers that try to make sense of morality in the Western tradition in terms of rules end up with rules that don't make any sense, like utilitarianism, like the greatest good for the greatest number. And you can see why these rules don't make any sense when you just look at these thought experiments called the Trolley Problems, where the question is, are there 6 people on a track and 1 person on a side track? Should you switch the train from the track to save the 6 people if it kills the person on the side track? Okay, you're at the switch, right? Well, in theory, yes, but many people would say no. Their intuitions would rebel at the idea of taking an action that actively kills someone, and especially if that person, suppose it's your daughter, right? Yeah. No, you're not going to switch the train. It doesn't matter who those other people are. If your loved one is the one, right? And so our moral intuitions, which make us good people, get in the way of following simple rules like that. So morality is not something that's simply logical. It's something intuitive and something that we feel from our experience of the entire world, and it builds up over time, right? The more we know. And so I think of morality in terms of a totally different way, in terms of basically in a Confucian way. So Confucius had the idea that is different from the Western tradition of morality, and it's more about who you are to others, right? Are you where you are in a hierarchy of people, and how you should behave according to your position in society, not how you should behave in general to all humans, but how you should behave to particular people. And that makes a lot more sense, because if you treated your children like random strangers, then you would be a psychopath. Okay, there are certain people that are much, much more important to you than others. And that is normal. That is moral. That is part of morality, is having a hierarchy within your own world for people that you would give a lot of resources to protect, perhaps all of your resources, and then other people that you perceive as threats to those important people. They're important too, because they're enemies, right? Or threats. Not so much enemies anymore, but potential threats. And then there are people that you're kind of indifferent towards, and the further away they are in space from you and time, the more indifferent you are. And that's perfectly normal. That's because morality is something that emerges from biology. So we have to have a theory of morality that accounts for the fact that we are biological organisms. And things don't emerge from biological organisms that aren't useful to the organism for survival and reproduction, because otherwise those traits would have gone away through epistolution and evolution. So I think this Confucian way of viewing morality is much more sensible, and I think of it in terms of alliances. So we have very important alliances with particular rules, with particular people, and as we go outwards in scale, these alliances get more diffuse, and the rules are more generic, right? So thou shalt not kill, that basically applies to everyone on earth. But in terms of trading a lot of resources and a lot of time, that's something we only do with our intimate associates or family and friends. So that is a gift, right? And we give and receive in those intimate alliances. And so this all scales outward, and it is progressive. So we learn over time through accumulation and epistolution. We learn how to do it better, how to make better alliances that better satisfy our needs. And as a species, we've done an incredible job at doing that. So part of acceleration is, the main part of acceleration is the acceleration of these moral alliances, this ability to harmonize our interests with other beings. And this began a long time ago with crossing species boundaries, right? We domesticated the wolf and created dogs. We domesticated, horses and cattle and sheep and goats and pigs, chickens, and all sorts of things, all sorts of plants that we also have this intimate sort of alliances with. And if you've ever been a farmer, you certainly realize that there are threats to your alliances. These intimate alliances with your crops that you depend on, they have enemies, right? They have pests and diseases and predators that are out there that you have to take on as your problem. So that framework, I think, is a lot more realistic. The framework of alliances is a more realistic way to look at morality, and it's a way that makes sense of why it is that we would all express morality and how it would be a component of accumulated knowledge that would fully control our actions, right? It also has another consequence, which is that there is a direction to this, right? So finding better solutions, better moral solutions, is our work here on Earth. And it's possible to act in ways that are not better solutions, that are worse solutions. So betraying a close friend that counted on you for something is not a good solution. And that destroys an alliance that could have been, could have brought you a lot of opportunities. And so there's a good and an evil, right? And it's ad hoc. I mean, it's invented by every organism trying to find better solutions. But that eagerness, that love for the unknown is what drives us forward. And we can go too far, right? We can get too far ahead of our skis here. And that causes threats, if we were just going to abolish the military immediately, which I would pretty much be in favor of, but it would be a threat, right? Because there still are armed groups out there that want to do harm to people that we care about. So we would have to reconstitute the military somehow in a different way. Even though we'd all like to see a world with no guns, guns are part of these alliances that cement our ability to express our freedoms and our opportunities and to love one another and feel safe. So the without getting too much into politics at all, I want to talk about the perceived gap we have. So this is all, like, my friend Drew has pointed out that I've sort of painted this picture as like all roses, and like, how am I not in touch with, like, the deep problems that are affecting society? Everyone's upset. Well, if you think about progress, movement towards a goal, you have to have some sort of energy to move towards a goal. You have to have sort of impetus, right? Society doesn't change. It changes because of the will, the actions of people that change. We change. We have to have motives to change. So what causes motives? Well, the sense of injustice, right? The sense of things going wrong. That's the motive force that drives moral progress forward, right? If we were just satisfied with Jim Crow and stuff like that, then we would still be in Jim Crow, right? There had to be a dissatisfaction and a sense that the world was wrong in order to make any sort of moral progress and give people more equal opportunities, right? Everyone. So you have to be aware of problems and working on them for those problems to go away. So you have to have the problem before you have the solution. It's as simple as that. And so our awareness of problems is because our progress is happening much more rapidly than ever before towards better moral solutions. Our sense of urgency and our the gravity of our problems seems to us, is perceived by us to be greater than ever. And part of that is because problems that we are experiencing are the result of past solutions that were really, really good. The reason we have climate change is we found really, really good ways of making food for ourselves and providing a secure food supply, and cutting down forests to do so. And so now we have the issue of very, very slow global warming. And we can't prevent ourselves from solving this problem. I mean, we're clearly focused on it, and we're going to solve it. In fact, nuclear fusion may have already solved it. So we'll see how it plays out. But one thing we can be certain is that we will solve our problems, because that's what has been happening throughout human history, is that we've been solving our problems and solving them faster and faster. And it's because of accumulated knowledge. We can't prevent ourselves from learning. Now that we know that learning is the way that we evolved and the way our bodies stay organized, we know that this process is not going to like fall off a cliff because we make some sort of dumb mistake, right? We are aware of the mistakes that we're making. That's why we're progressing so quickly. So there's a gap. So there's a widening gap between our perceptions and reality. So if you back up, just take a deep breath, don't read the New York Times, and instead read books that survey the actual human condition, that look at actual rates of literacy and rates of child mortality and death from violence, and the freedoms of women, and the ability to express opinions democratically. If you actually look at that over time, you see that not only have we made tremendous progress, but we're making progress faster and faster. And I would just reference, Steven Pinker has a book called Enlightenment Now, and another one called Better Angels. And then Hans Rosling has a book called Factfulness. So, our demand for bad news, our intense focus on problems, creates this sense and this whole society of people who believe and sense that the world is getting worse. And it sort of has to be that way for our progress to happen faster, because people have to be deeply dissatisfied for progress to speed up. Now, in the future, I believe that we will invent some sort of solution to that problem itself, and that we will become able to be conscious of, to be working on, to be aware of problems unconsciously, and not let them weigh on our psyche as much as they do now. And maybe that technology has already been invented with meditation, but or psychedelics, but it seems like the widening gap between our perceptions and the actual progress that we're making is necessary right now, because it's part of what's driving the progress forward. So it's hard for me to dispute and try to, I try to dissuade people from their pessimism, but I realize that on some level their pessimism is very productive. Too much pessimism is terrible. And without pessimism, you can still work on problems. You can still work on making the world better, even if you don't believe that it's all about to fall off a cliff. I mean, I feel like I try to make the world better in many ways, and I'm an optimist. I think I'm better able to do that job as an optimist than as a pessimist. So what I mean by pessimism is something much deeper than what most people mean, I think. Some people say, oh, well, I know the world's going to hell, but I'm an optimist. And they mean like I'm ignoring that problem. Well, epistolution allows us not to ignore the way that the world's structured, and not to just say, oh, I'm an optimist, because you disregard the deeper beliefs that you have that things are out of balance, right? So it allows you to develop those deeper beliefs that there is a sort of harmony intrinsic to biological life, and that harmony is accelerating. So this is the part in this discussion where people kind of rear back and they're kind of like, what about boom? And they talk about their favorite problem, extinction or racism, or what about inequality of, income or something like that, that appears to be getting much worse. I definitely don't want to turn this lecture into like a tit for tat debate about why those problems have solutions. Because that's not the point of this. The point of this is to is for you to feel with me the feeling that there's hope. I'm certainly not saying that I have all of these solutions, right? I mean, none of us have solutions to any knowledge that's hasn't arrived yet from the future. We're building knowledge. It doesn't mean that we know how things are going to turn out, but we know that all of the efforts of all the living organisms on Earth, I say we know, that's an annoying habit. We don't know. We can suppose. We have a reason to believe. We have a possibility for hope. All the efforts of all the living beings on Earth are directed towards moral improvements in their own world and communicated throughout the whole world. So that doesn't mean that birds stop picking on worms, but it means that over time, and for simple organisms, it's a very, very, very long time. But for complex organisms, the changes happen rapidly. And we're finding ways to preserve life on Earth and preserve beauty and enhance it. And we're certainly finding ways to take care of our fellow humans in much more profoundly powerful ways, important ways, and prevent war and famine and disease and torture and oppression. So we're making progress. Where is all this headed, right? Where is this scary accelerated progress taking us? We have no idea. One thing we know, though, or we can suppose, one thing we can suppose is that it's directed at things that we care about, things that we want to happen. What are the things that are our deepest desires? Those are the goals that we're pursuing. And those are the problems we eventually solve. Throughout human history, we've eventually solved the problems that were the most urgent. The first one was just food supply, and then physical security, and then disease, right? And then gender parity, the emancipation of women, and then diminishment of rules that distinguish between races. And now it's rules that distinguish between sexual preferences. So all these things have been sort of vanquished, not entirely. And it's good for us to be dissatisfied in the ways that they're not completely gone, but we've made it a long way, and we're making it faster and faster. So peace, freedom, health, youth. We want to vanquish biological aging, and I think there are reasons to believe that we will be able to fairly soon. Because as I mentioned before, the process of senescence is something, once we understand epistolution and understand the instructions of cells, we'll be able to drive that process in reverse in certain cases. We'll be able to grow. If our hearts are eyes are wearing out, we'll be able to grow new hearts and new eyes, and be able to rewrite our neural pathways, prevent Alzheimer's and prevent cognitive decline and dementia. osteoporosis and all the problems that we see. We probably at some point will have medical cancers, right? We'll have cells that divide freely in our body that fix things, that solve problems instead of destroying us and killing us, right? Cancer is just a cell, a human cell that's lost touch with itself, with the self. It's become no longer part of the self. It's reverted to a unicellular self. It's become a unicellular organism, treating the body as a foreign environment. And so you can see that cancer process is intrinsic to life, and there's something that we can it's something that once we understand what it is in the envelope of cellular environment that tells a cell what to do, where to go, and what to become, we'll have a handle on that cancer process, because a cancer is just a human cell that's no longer playing with the team. It has become a unicellular organism, and its goal is to survive, right? Its goal is to survive and spread, because that's the goal of life. But it's treating your body, our bodies, as a foreign environment, external environment, instead of part of itself. So that's why cancer has been so hard to deal with, is because it's a result of epistolution gone wrong. So we have to understand epistolution before we can understand and fully prevent cancer. So we have no choice in this matter, right? The universe outside of us, there's no part of the universe that's not affected by the parts that are out exterior to it, right? You can't draw a boundary around anything that doesn't have influences coming from outside. So we really don't have free will in this epistolutionary world. We're a part of the universe. We're a set of particles that's being driven by its external world. Those are the instructions, right? We just follow the instructions, and that's what we end up doing. So we have this perception that we're free individual agents that do what we want, but that's just because so much knowledge has been accumulated inside of our system that it's bouncing around, and it's making us feel that way. And that's a healthy perception to have, but it's an illusion, right? What's actually happened is that we're responding to our environment. We're not aware of all the ways that we're responding. So that's a pretty profound thought, and worth dwelling on for a while, worth thinking about. It's a sort of surrender. It's a surrender. And that's the sort of spiritual aspect of epistolution that I think really resonates with the traditional theistic religions, right? I mean, we've had this sense that we're part of an interconnected whole, and we can't escape, and we must follow the commands of this supreme system. We've had that intuition for as long as humans have been around, and we've been trying to sort of push that away with our system of modern science that was based on emergence, right? But we can't push it away anymore because the evidence has refuted emergence, and so we have to recognize that we're driven by the universe. We're instructed by the universe to do the things that we're doing, and it resembles being instructed by God, which would have been a more antiquated way of thinking about the same thing. But it's an ancient tradition of sort of contemplative spirituality. So that makes it really deeply satisfying. Deeply satisfying. I wanted to say a few words about the way that this theory is sort of where it is in the world, and how it is in the world. So um, I'm following a tradition of sort of natural philosophy. I mean, it wasn't like the 18th century, all scientists were natural philosophers, and they were always proposing creative new worldviews, right? Even if it was just about like gases or electricity or whatever, they were just proposing new ways that the world was shaped. And sometime in the 20th century, scientists, people that are professional scientists, science became a profession with a professional bureaucratic class of workers and um, programs in school that explicitly specialized in data collection of various sorts. And so um, I think most people involved in the scientific project kind of lose track of the fact that we have to operate from philosophy first and then look for data, because facts are only observations made in the presence of a theory, right? There's no such thing as a fact unless you have a theory that makes it a fact. So we have to develop our theories first and then look for refutations of the theory. And no matter how many facts we find that agree with the theory, if we find some that don't agree, then the whole thing has to be thrown out, because the world doesn't disagree with itself. It means our theory is wrong. That point of view is called critical rationalism. It's something that was developed by the philosopher of science Karl Popper in the 20th century. And I discovered it through David Deutsch's books, The Beginning of Infinity in particular. And it's extremely important. Like, I grasped it intuitively right away when I read it. It's opposed to the idea that kind of took over science, which is called logical positivism, which is more associated with the philosopher Wittgenstein. And they would say, like, don't worry about the meaning, just sort of shut up and calculate. Sort of like all puzzles are just, all language is just, all you can do is describe things. And that doesn't make sense to me. I think that, we have to develop theories that make the world make sense, and then see if those theories are right. We can't just shut up and calculate. Language is not a prison. It's a window, right? It's something that describes reality, and we can look out there and see how well our structures that are built in language, that are theories, how well those structures agree with what's out there. You have to believe that there is reality and that you can reach it by knowledge, through knowledge. And we've kind of lost that faith. I mean, this idea of inductivism is that you just gather examples, and somehow from the examples you build the theory later. But all you're doing is you're not being consciously aware of the theory that you have, and it's important to be explicitly aware of the theory that you have. So as I said, like, these things that I'm discussing here are very difficult to test. And so they've been avoided. These questions have been avoided by science. What is sleep? What is dreaming? Why is what sorts of impulses, external forces control the fate of cells and control the behavior of cells are extremely difficult to test and to experiment on, but not impossible. So there's a lot of really interesting work being done on regeneration. And regeneration is the same problem as fates and behavior of cells, right? It's the fundamental problem of the cellular environment controlling what the cell does. And so there's a researcher named Michael Levin at Tufts University who has been doing some amazing work. You should totally look him up on YouTube. He's all over YouTube, and he does incredible work on regenerative organisms, regrowing frogs' legs, and regrowing planaria with multiple heads, and they can inherit multiple heads from their parents. And none of this involves changing genes, right? This is just changing cellular environments through manipulating this stuff called gap junctions, which are a lot like synapses between neurons. They're intercellular communication pathways. You manipulate those, you can change the fate of the organism, what it grows into. So tremendous work is being done, incredibly important. I have tried to develop a computer model of my oscillator scheme, and it's posted on GitHub. It's linked to in talkingoctopus.com. It's a program written in Python. It might work. I don't know. It might just require a tremendous amount of computational power. I mean, even to have a system that has, 150 neurons that fire, if there were 10,000 on an average of 10,000 connections per neuron, that would be an incredibly sophisticated data structure, and modeling that as an oscillator would be very computationally intensive. So it's hard to know if computers are just not powerful enough yet for my scheme to work, or if I'm off track. I don't know, but it's an important question that can be investigated empirically if you're focused on the right thing. So I just want to encourage all of you out there to pursue the deep questions, come up with creative theories, and then try and think of ways to test them. And let's communicate about this stuff. Write to me. I'm looking for people who are interested in this subject, that are grappling with what keeps an organism alive, and are aware of the fact that we don't know, and that there's this tremendous, powerful, unknown force that we don't yet understand. We know that we will understand life when we can build it from scratch, out of non-living materials, right? And we cannot do that yet. When we can do that, we will be in an incredibly powerful position to help ourselves and help our loved ones and help our whole world. And so let's keep going in that direction. Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you got something out of it. And I hope that this set of 3 lectures lives on and is enjoyed by many people in the years to come.